This is my wrap-up review and comparison of the Nikon D7100 and the Canon 70D. Now, before you think that this is one of those videos where the guy is just talking about the cameras and he hasn't actually put his hands on them, please watch my recent videos where I have these two cameras side by side. I have videos that now show the low light capabilities of both cameras side by side, and stills and images, moire tests, focus tracking, and also just kind of a complete careful tour of the features of the cameras. If you haven't watched those yet, after this one, you can go watch those and make more of a decision for yourself about which camera is right for you. Now, the good news is both of these cameras are excellent. I've been really happy, pleasantly surprised by how well the Canon 70D does in low light. I didn't expect it to match the Nikon D7100, but let's just jump right into the review and talk about some strengths and weaknesses of both, starting with the Nikon D7100. So the D7100 is a really well-built camera with a magnesium alloy body, tons of buttons, many of them customizable, a dedicated bracketing button, which I think is a really nice touch for you HDR shooters, and a very professional level feature dual card slots. That gives you the ability to have an automatic backup as you're shooting, or shoot RAW to one, JPEG to another, or just gives you tons more room if you want to shoot to one and when it fills up automatically start shooting to the other card. On the other hand, the Canon 70D is an aluminum body with a polycarbonate on top, and it only has one card slot. Now, I got asked the other day about this, how big a deal is it not to be backing up the files as you shoot? Well, for many years we did not have dual card slots. I have shot well over 100,000 images, both in professional and personal situations, and I have had a few scares, but always scares being cards that said they were corrupted, images that didn't look like they downloaded correctly the first time, but all of them have always been recoverable with image recovery software. So it's a really nice peace of mind to have, and certainly if you're working in a professional environment most of the time, it is really nice to be able to back up your files as you're shooting. In case something goes terribly wrong with that card, or maybe when you pull it out it gets dropped down the sewer drain or into the river or something and you have a backup. But if you're careful, image loss, and you're working with high quality cards, image loss isn't something that you should really be worried about. Now, I mentioned that a lot of the buttons on the D7100 are customizable. A lot of them are on the 70D as well, so you do have that flexibility in setting up both cameras the way you want them to work. One of the real strengths of the D7100 is its low light performance. It can produce beautiful images in lower light at high ISOs. I was quite stunned. I was shooting some images up around ISO 5000 that I still felt were clean enough for use. Especially after you throw those through Lightroom noise reduction, they look absolutely gorgeous. I didn't expect the 70D to be as good as it is. Their headline feature is their dual pixel autofocus, which we'll talk more about in a minute, and they didn't really say too much about low light, but the 70D sensor is quite good as well. I spent a lot of time poring over images and videos side by side, and much of the time I can't tell a difference. When I can tell the difference, however, I often give the D7100 a slight edge. And that edge, you see that with dynamic range. The D7100 sensor does just a little bit better job of giving you a greater latitude from your darks to your lights, and I especially see that in lower light situations. But again, both of these cameras do a fine job of low light for being an aps-c sensor, and it's nice that we're seeing some forward progress. As far as focusing goes in low light, the D7100 and the 70D both do a great job. The D7100, of course, has 51 autofocus points in there. 15 are cross-type. The Canon 70D has 19 autofocus points. All 19 are cross-type. I had a lot of questions about this. 51 versus 19. Wow, isn't 51 a lot better? In my real-world tests, there isn't a huge difference to be seen between both of these cameras in low-light focusing or otherwise. Now, the D7100 does offer that nice extra crop mode, which gives you a little bit faster burst rate. We'll talk more about that in a second. And it also gives you full frame focus coverage, or I should say coverage across the frame. I gotta not use the word full frame. Coverage across the frame is focus. That is nice for your faster moving objects to be able to fill the frame with focus points, and then the camera's going to lock on to what's moving. But again, most of the time in real world tests that I ran, I saw very little difference in the focusing power of these two, until you switch to live view. Now, as I said, Canon's headline features this dual pixel autofocus. It works really well. It's not just a marketing gimmick. I think you've probably seen videos by now. If you haven't, stop, watch my videos. I've got at least 2 of them up that show this. And it works really well, and it works really well even in low light. Now, the Nikon still struggles in low light for live view focusing. And it's something that it may not be a big deal to you at all. I don't use live view focusing for most of my professional shooting. It's too slow, but using the 70D, oftentimes I have found it to be quite fast, and plus that articulated screen, and I'll touch more about that when we get into the strengths of the 70D. But in low light, live view focusing, the Canon 70D is a clear winner there. Another strength of the D7100 is just the image quality in general. I already just waxed poetic about the low light image quality being so great, but in general, image and video files are really sharp. Now, Nikon removed their anti-aliasing filter from this camera, and that is a little filter that actually adds just a tiny bit of blur to the image to avoid moire issues, and we'll talk more about that in a second as well. And the result is you get sharper files, but maybe you get more moire. Well, the truth is, I don't get any with a Nikon D7100. Real quick, moire is this kind of like optical illusion you get from finely repeating patterns, and it can be distracting and annoying, and camera makers have put in filters to control that or reduce that or eliminate that over the past few years. Nikon has figured out how to eliminate that without that filter, which means you get sharper files out of it. The quality is just absolutely stunning, and I cannot make the D7100 produce moire even when I'm trying really hard. It's a little bit of a different story on the Canon side. It's pretty easy to see moire in finely repeating patterns, a screen door, a thin pinstriped suit, or other fabrics like that. I was shooting some night shots the other night, and one of the screens in a window, a second-story window off in the distance, caught my eye in the video, and saw this kind of, you get this kind of swirl pattern, and that was happening up there. So, and what's ironic is Canon has left in their anti-aliasing filter, so I really hope that Canon can steal some of this technology from Nikon soon and control this. Now, the good news about this is it is certainly controllable or avoidable in most situations. But if it's something that you're really concerned about in the type of shooting you do, the Nikon is going to give you clearly better results as far as the moire goes. M-O-I-R-E, a little accent on the E. The Nikon's viewfinder is a 100% viewfinder, so when you look through that, what you see is what you're going to get when you press the shutter button. That also means that it's just a tiny bit brighter. It's not a huge difference, but when I'm looking back and forth between the D7100 and the 70D back and forth, I do notice just a slight brighterness to the Nikon D7100, and it's appreciated, especially in the lower light situations where you are trying to figure out what you want to focus on, and just a little bit more light through that lens and in the viewfinder is helpful. So on the software side, there are tons of scenes, effects, and the retouch menu all built into the D7100 that are quite robust. There are way more scenes and effects in the D7100 than there are in the Canon 70D. A lot of them feel gimmicky, but I know that there are people out there that are excited by them. Selective coloring, the miniature video or miniature photo effect, those are all pretty nifty, and they work really well in the D7100, along with a really robust retouch menu where you can do a lot of touching up on the camera. Now, it's not really something I'd recommend. It's not really something that I think professionals are spending time in the field doing, but it's all there, and I wanted you to make sure you're aware about that. Last feature I want to touch on the Nikon is the Wi-Fi ability. Now, you might be thinking, if you have been paying attention, well, Canon has Wi-Fi built in and Nikon doesn't, so why are you talking about this under Nikon strengths? Well, I am mentioning it because, yes, you do have to spend an extra $60 for a dongle that you do have to plug into the side of the camera, whereas on the Canon side it is completely built in, but it does allow you to transfer full resolution image files over to a phone or tablet. And the app is basic, but so is Canon's app, fairly basic as well. And it lets you do live view shooting as well, but it is extra $60. But the point I wanted to make was that it does allow you to transfer full resolution files over to a phone or tablet. On the Canon, you are limited to that 1920 by 1080 size. So some strengths of the Canon 70D. Well, the headline feature, as I mentioned, is that dual pixel autofocus. This, we don't need to go into the scientific details of what's going on, but basically all of the sensor now is helping with focusing during live view, and the results are really, really impressive. So in the past, live view focusing was often very slow, and you would watch the lens hunt for focus. And what I mean by that is, let's say we got, let's say here's your focus and you're shooting from over here, and the lens would hit that focus spot, move just beyond it to double check, and then come back. So you would see this kind of womp womp effect. This new focusing system from Canon completely eliminates that, and it doesn't matter if you're using an STM lens or a USM lens or a non-USM lens. Basically, any decent Canon lens that's capable of autofocusing will lock on and hit that target on the first try and won't do any checking and wavering past it. I've been really, really impressed. You can even do this, I have a video showing this, at really shallow depths of field. So this is what's really nice now about this camera setup, is that you can have camcorder-like experience with DSLR quality and low light, and be shooting with those really wide apertures, which gives you that really shallow depth of field that everybody loves when they're shooting with DSLRs. If you add in an STM lens, then you've got that smooth, or sorry, I shouldn't say smooth because it's smooth otherwise, you have that silent, the microphone on the camera is not going to pick up the sound, and then it's very much like a camcorder experience. Now, you add into the fact that you have this articulating touch screen, and mind blown a little bit, it really is and functions very similar to a camcorder. Now, some of you might be saying, I don't want a camcorder, I want a DSLR. That's fine. You do still have a DSLR, but you need to recognize that there are multiple markets of people out there now that are interested in these cameras, and what might be right for you or wrong for you might be right for someone else. That's all I'm saying right now. So this articulating screen is wonderful. You can flip it out, you can hold the camera up high, and this is something that I love when I'm shooting receptions during weddings. Oftentimes the bride is in the middle of a group of people. I know fun stuff is going on in there, and I get the camera up above my head. And without an articulating screen, it's often very difficult to know what's going on. With an articulating screen, you can see what's going on, and because this live view works so well, it's really quite impressive. Add on top of that the fact that it's a touchscreen, and it really makes this camera a lot of fun to use. Now, before you think that I'm a touchscreen fanboy, when the T4i was announced with a touchscreen, I was like, you know, not really interested. I use my manual controls. I shoot in manual mode a lot. I know what buttons I need to push, what dials I need to turn to get the settings I want. That's it. And for most of the time in professional shooting, I still shoot that way. But it is very, very nice to be able to pull up all of the function of the camera on the back, a couple of quick touches to get into the settings that you want, live view shooting, macro, scenics. You know, I mentioned that the viewfinder is only 98%. Well, the LCD is 100%, and so what you see on that is what you're going to get, and to be able to touch, to focus, and have it do that so quick is a really, really nice feature. I just mentioned the physical controls. One of the things that I really like about the Canon 70D, and I'm listing as a strength, is that it's one-handed in operation. Now, the Nikon D7100 has a lot of buttons down the left-hand side, and it's kind of a two-handed operation to change your ISO. But with the Canon, all of those settings are up at the top, right above the grip, or right above the LCD, next to the grip. You hold, you wheel the dial, and everything works really nicely and really smoothly. So I appreciate that. And that top level LCD. Both cameras have it. Nikon's is actually a little better. If I was getting down to that level of pickiness in this video, I would give the top level LCD strength to Nikon. It is full sized. And it gives you all of the information you need to know about the camera. The Canon's is a little bit narrower, and they've left off some information. The only one I can think of off the top of my head that they've left off that annoys me is what format you're shooting in, JPEG or RAW. So you don't know that immediately by looking at the top LCD, and I'd like to know that. One of the other performance features of the Canon 70D that's really nice is that they've given it a solid buffer. So it's got 7 frames per second. You hold down that button and you fire off those 7 frames per second, and it keeps going for a few seconds before you fill the buffer and get a little bit of a slowdown. It's not too terrible of a slowdown though, and if you shoot JPEG, there is no slowdown at all. You can keep on holding down that button and shooting at 7 frames per second for as long as you want. On the D7100, this is my one real complaint with this camera. The buffer is small, and if you're a sports photographer or wildlife photographer and you need to squeeze off 10 to 15 highest quality shots that you can, you're not going to get the full 6 frames per second that it offers. Now the D7100 you can put into a crop mode and it will then give you 7 frames per second, but in my testing, and I have a link down below, everything I've mentioned, I have links down below with supporting evidence, that you get a slowdown very quickly. Disappointingly quickly. So for those type of photographers, I don't think the D7100 is best for you. 70D is very good. I've gotten a lot of questions about wildlife photography, birds in flight. The 70D and autofocus, it's borrowing heavily from the Canon 7D, which is a real champ in this respect, and it does a very, very good job. I'm not a bird in flight photographer, so I can't give you more details than that, but my testing and the reviews of bird in flight photographers or wildlife photographers, let's be simple and call them that, has been very positive. So the last strength I want to mention of the Canon 70D is the Wi-Fi feature built in. It's very robust. It has more options than you have on the Canon than on the Nikon D7100 side. But as I said, I'm a little disappointed that you can't send over full resolution files to your tablet or phone, or at least larger than small JPEG. That 1920 by 1080 is the limiting size. But you can control it from a computer, you can control it from a phone or tablet. You also, the video is completely turned off when you have Wi-Fi on, so there's no video shooting remotely, only still photography. So those are the important points that I wanted to make. I probably forgot something or other, so if you have any comments or questions, you can leave a message down below. But I hope you've been following along, kind of checking off mentally or on paper what's important to you, because as I said at the beginning of this, both of these cameras are very, very good, but one is more suited for some types of photography or videography than another. Parents, I think you are looking at just an absolute perfect device for capturing your children growing up, both video and photo. You know, there's always a little concern about having a camera like this being user-friendly, as it is kind of billed as a semi-professional. Can a parent just pick this up and start taking photos and video with it? And the answer is yes, and most of that yes comes from the fact that the touch screen makes the camera much more approachable. But you know, that live view focusing for video just works, and works very, very nicely. Now, if you're an indie filmmaker and you want to squeeze out the absolute best quality from the camera that you're buying, the D7100 is excellent. Something I didn't touch on for the D7100 because I think it's fairly specialized, but I'll mention it now here in the summary, is that it does give full HDMI uncompressed video out, so you can run an HDMI cord out of the Nikon D7100 into a hard drive recorder or into an external monitor so you can see what's going on. And that gives you some flexibility, and for some filmmakers that's quite important. Put a really nice lens on there, a really nice sign prime, and you can be creating some wonderful, wonderful video at a good price. Both these cameras are priced very, very similarly. Now, that was really just kind of 2 use case scenarios. There are tons more, and I think one of the ones that is kind of like on the line, or the argument, is the wedding photographer. You know, primarily professionals only manual focus when they're shooting, and I think we're on a line here where there are going to start to be some professional, well, there already are. There are some who consider themselves professionals. I'm not going to make the argument one way or another, but that use autofocus. Up until now, autofocus really wasn't trustworthy enough, and I'm not sure with this camera we're quite there for what I would call personally professional level work, but we are very, very close. And so I think there's going to be a lot of wedding videographers out there that are interested in shooting with this setup to give them that wonderful look without having to worry about manual focus all of the time. And as I said, That's just a couple of use cases. If you have a question about which camera is right for you, or if you want to make an argument, I said you can leave a comment down below. But if you have a question you really want answered, you need to leave it over on my Facebook page. I make a concerted effort over there to keep up with questions. I can't keep up with all of the comments I get on all of the videos, and some will go by, and sometimes I'll find one months later that was a wonderful question that I would have liked to answer, but I just, didn't see it until literally months later. But over on the Facebook page, I answer almost everything that is posted there. Thanks so much for watching, and if you have any questions, as I said, Facebook, and please subscribe so you can support more videos like this in the future. Thank you.